the first thing I always have to do in preaching these retreats is explain the difference between the genus and a species of a retreat. You know, a genus is like an animal, and then there's different kinds of animals. They're not all the same, even if they're all animals. And retreats, even traditional retreats, aren't all the same. There's different species of the genus of retreat. And in tradition, people don't know that because all they know is the Ignatian retreats, like 5-day Ignatian retreats. So people get the genus and the species mixed up. They think, if you don't do exactly what they do in the Ignatian retreat, well, then it's not a retreat. You know, like some people say, you mean you can go to communion the first day? Well, that's not a retreat. And there's no general confession? Well, that's not a retreat. See what I mean? So you got to get that clear for some of you who've only done those retreats. Well, this is going to be different, but it's still a retreat. And it's a Catholic retreat, okay? Not Novus Ordo, just because we don't have a general confession on the third day and we can have it to be anything. And that sort of leads me into the theme of the retreat. I call this, the title I give this retreat is The Spiritual Life, and it's based on a book by Father Garrigou-Lagrange called The Three Ways of the Spiritual Life. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a little book. I get it confused with another book that he wrote called The Three Ages of the Spiritual Life, which is a big 2-volume work where he goes into all the details of different things about the spiritual life. This is just a little book where he describes what are called the 3 ways of the spiritual life. You perhaps heard of them: the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. See some blank faces, but that's good. That's why I'm here. Now, hopefully you've all heard of it. 20th century, one of the greatest people. In Jokum. I had some professors who had. It's funny, nobody talks about it. It's funny. It's a shadow over him. Because even, well, no, I'm not going to get that. I have to talk about spiritual life. So as I was saying, the Ignatian retreats are almost uniquely about the purgative way. Because that's what it's for. It's for people at the beginning. The priest who sort of created this form of Ignatian retreats did it to convert Spanish soldiers. Okay, so it's pretty tough because you have to be tough to convert Spanish soldiers. And he took the first week, because the Ignatian retreat of Saint Ignatian lasts 30 days. Obviously, most people can't do 30 days. So he formed this miniature Ignatian retreat, 5 days, and it's almost exclusively on the purgative way, which is to convert people from sin. But unfortunately, that's the only retreat often that people can do in tradition. It's changing a little bit, but not completely. Some people, they do it over and over and over again. And after a while, they find, well, can I do something else? And I keep trying to tell his side priests, why don't you do, second week and the third week in the board of St. Ignatius? But for some reason, I don't know, they don't want to do that. Part of the reason is because, most people, that's what they need, is the first week to convert, right? But it's not the only thing there is. Okay. So this retreat is designed for people who have done that part of the spiritual life already. So, and I preached it a number of times when I was here 10 years ago, and some people were just overjoyed. Wow, there's something else. And that's one thing hopefully you'll understand as we go along. I'll explain it basically now. There's different gears in the spiritual life. I'm going to read that right. Yeah, I'll just do that. I'll talk about it in a minute. First, though, just kick off the retreat before we get into the actual theme of the retreat. I want to talk about St. Dominic a little bit, because it's feast day yesterday, and actually tomorrow is the actual day he died, right? The 6th of August. So yesterday, for those who were there, I spoke a little bit about his virtue. Today, I just want to summarize an idea that was expressed by a famous Dominican. That's up for Father Etienne. When that time to tell you, he was provincial of the province of Toulouse, which was the most important province in order, because that's where St. Dominic started, right? And he died in 1940. Okay, so his first part of the first 20th century. And in Easter of 1935, he wrote what's become a famous text, actually. We're going to read it at the table. And it was to commemorate the 7th centenary of the canonization of St. Dominic. So we're going to read it at the table. I'm just going to give you the doctrine that he teaches of St. Dominic as our father. That's what is the main thing, really, that he says in this famous document. He explains how Dominic is our father and we are our children. And it's beautiful way he writes. It's very simple. I'll tell you a little bit about him. I can't resist. He was brilliant, a student, but he had some sort of cerebral, his veins exploded or something in his head when he was still a deacon, and so he couldn't study. But they ordained him anyway, because he was pious. But didn't know what to do with him, because he couldn't study, he couldn't really preach, and he would break things in the sacristy. It was a complete disaster. So they sent him to La Sainte-Baume, which is the place where St. Mary Magdalene went, because, St. Mary Magdalene, her sister Martha, and Lazarus came to Marseille. And she ended up in this mountain that overlooks the Mediterranean. It's called the Sainte-Baume. Sainte-Baume, the Baume, I think that means, what? No, that doesn't. No, it's getting mixed up. That's just the name of this mountain. And there was a cave there where she stayed. Anyway, the Dominicans had a sanctuary there, take care of the pilgrims who would come to this cave. So he was sent there with a lay brother, all alone. It's up in this mountain. And he was kind of bored. He didn't know what to do. So he would come down from the mountain every day, and because the bottom of the mountain, there was like a cafe, and he could read the newspapers, and have a break. All on the mountain. And he talks about how one day he was coming down, and he got to this crossroads where there was where going down to the cafe, and there's the crossroads where there's another path that goes up to the top of the mountain, where they say that the angels would take St. Mary Magdalene right to the top. And there's like a little chapel there. He talks about this later on. He says, "This going down. What are you going to do? Distract yourself? You're not going." And so he took the other road that goes up to the top of this mountain, and he started to pray. Especially the rosary, they say he would pray 6 rosaries a day, 6 full rosaries a day, like in France, a rosary is 15. And he became a holy man, and people would come to see him. And he was elected provincial of the province of Toulouse twice, so he became a very holy man. I couldn't resist telling you that. And he talks then about St. Dominic. So we'll divide what he said. I'm going to read that, but the main thing that I want to point out is this doctrinal section where he speaks. He gives 3 points. First, he talks about the general principle of the reality of second causes. And this first cause with all second causes, and their second causes are really causes. He's going to explain that. The second point is he applies this principle, reality of second causes, to the supernatural order. In the divine economy for the communication of graces. Okay. There's a certain second causality in this communication of grace, the supernatural grace. And then finally, we'll use this principle in order to understand the reality of the spiritual paternity of St. Dominic with regard to all of his children. Okay. So firstly, the doctrine of St. Thomas on the reality of the activity of second causes in the natural order. Because certain people at his time were saying that creatures cannot be veritable causes, and that the dignity of cause belongs to God alone. And so they would say, for example, it isn't the fire that burns, it's God that burns in the fire. Okay? It's God that's the only one who can cause. And St. Thomas refutes this opinion, firstly by remarking that this does not exalt the greatness of the causality of God, which is why these people were saying that, it's only God could be a cause. Okay. He says, well, actually, it reduces the causality of God because it says he can't be a cause of causality. That is, he can't make something else, be a real cause. Get it? It's more for God to cause causality in other people than to cause everything himself. And it just kind of makes sense. A king, for example, he doesn't do everything himself in his kingdom. He sends people off to do that, and that's part of being a king. So God gives this gift of being a cause to other things himself. He causes causality itself. And he gives another example, not just a king. It's more appropriate for our subject. It's the role played by the prayers of the saints in the execution of the decrees of predestination established by God. So these prayers of the saints don't cause predestination, which is the decree of God to save someone, right? God doesn't predestine someone because of the prayers made for this person. But these prayers of the saints, or other people, have nonetheless a real role in the accomplishment of the effect of predestination. Now, this is a great phrase. I always think. Deus non vult propter hoc sed. Wait, what's the word? Deus vult hoc propter hoc sed non hoc. So how's your Latin? Who can translate this for me? Deus vult hoc propter hoc sed non propter hoc vult. It's kind of a riddle, a trick. God wills that this be because of this. Okay? God wills that this thing be because of this other thing. But it's not because of this other thing that God wills. Okay, so I'll explain the riddle. God wills that St. Paul be saved by the prayer of St. Stephen. Sorry, right? St. Stephen prayed, for his persecutors, and one of which was St. Paul. St. Paul converted. And it's because of the prayer of St. Stephen. Deus vult hoc propter hoc. He wills that St. Paul be saved by the prayer of St. Stephen. Sed non propter hoc vult. But it's not because of the prayer of St. Stephen that he wills the whole thing. See? He wills not just that St. Paul be saved, but he wills that he be saved by the prayer of St. Stephen, which is truly the cause of his being saved. Get it? It seems like it's going on there. Right? See, it's God wills everything, including causality, even free causality. He inspires the saints to pray, and yet their prayer is a free movement of their will. And so it's their prayer. And it's because of their prayer that St. Paul converts free. Okay? All right. So the person is not predestined because of the prayers made for him, but God ordains, nonetheless, that this person be saved on account of the prayers said for him. And so St. Augustine says, if St. Stephen had not prayed as he did, the church would not have had St. Paul. Because he's a real cause to convert St. Paul. But that was willed by God, too. It's not because of the prayers of St. Stephen that God willed simply that St. Paul be saved. But he willed both. He willed that St. Paul be saved, and he willed that he be saved by the prayers of St. Stephen. Okay? It's an important principle. And it's very Dominican. It's one thing that separates us from the Jesuits, for example, about the soul pressure and predestination. Okay? It's called physical premotion. If you want the technical term. Physical premotion to well-by grace. Again, I'm not going to go into that because I could talk about that for the whole retreat. St. Thomas adds that if this causality of creatures was not real, the very existence of these creatures would be in vain. Because God called them into existence precisely to play a role in this universe that he created. So if they didn't have any causality, they would be vain. Right? Or like God, he has a play and he has characters because they have to play a part in the play. So if they didn't, well, then there's no point creating them in the first place. Agere sequitur esse. Action follows the heat. That's what we're just talking about. These things exist so that they can act. Okay. I mean, what they do follows what they are, but the whole point of them being is so that they act. They do something. Okay. So the causality of creatures must be real, or there'll be no point them to exist because they exist so that they can act. Okay. All right. So that's the first principle, the reality of the reality of second causes. The second one is we apply this to the supernatural order. And in particular, to the dogma that we say in the Creed, the communion of saints. I believe in the communion of saints. Go with that. What do you believe in? Well, Father Vessier writes, in the formation and the development of the mystical body of Christ, the divine goodness, without any doubt, is by itself infinitely sufficient. It has no need of exterior help in order to attain its ends. That's what we're talking about, right? He's the first cause. He doesn't need any other causes, right? But out of love for creatures and to augment their glory and their happiness, often it pleases this goodness to call upon their collaboration and associate them as second causes to its infinite activity. Okay, so that's what you're talking. He gives them a share in his causality. So in the formation of the mystical body of Christ, God calls upon the action of second causes. He doesn't act directly on all individuals indifferently. but rather he follows a certain order, acting on some directly and then on others through them. Now we see that in a universal manner in the humanity of Christ, who is the unique mediator of all men with God. God doesn't give grace, supernatural life, to each individual man directly. He gives it directly to Christ, and then through him to others. Right? That's what's called the capital grace of Christ. It's grace as head of the mystical body. There's no grace that anyone receives that isn't come through him. So St. John says, right? He's full of grace and truth, and of his fullness we have all received. Okay, so that's an example of this causality of creatures in the supernatural world. Every grace anyone receives comes from Christ and from nowhere else. God doesn't do it directly. It's Christ who gives the grace. It's humanity. Okay, I'm talking about. And then so finally, that brings us to the third point, is to understand the reality of the spiritual paternity of St. Dominic over each one of us. Just as God does not give grace directly to all men, but rather only through the mediation of Christ, in a similar way, Christ himself uses other intermediaries, the saints, in order to communicate his grace to men. You see how it works. There's always there's an order to things. Now, this mediation of grace from Christ to men of the saints is found in a universal manner in Our Lady. She's the mediatrix of all graces. Okay, so you see how it works. It's not God directly to men, it's God to men through Christ, but it's not directly Christ to men, it's Christ to Our Lady to men. And that's it. To deny that is, it's not a heresy because it hasn't been defined yet, but it's an error. Because it's been taught since the 4th century as a doctrine by the church, and in the last couple of centuries, it's been explicitly repeated by popes. So, anyway, St. Bernard of Siena puts it, all grace that is communicated in this world arrives to us through 3 stages, from God to Christ, from Christ to the Virgin, from the Virgin to us. But what we say of Our Lady in a universal way can be said also of other saints in a particular way, especially of the founders of orders, with regard to the members of their orders. And this is where we find the paternity of St. Dominic. So Father Vessier writes, just as God gave to his Christ a plenary capital grace that from his heart flows out upon all the mystical body, in a similar way to St. Dominic, as to the various patriarchs of the religious life, he gave this plenitude of grace upon which their descendants must live. Plenitude received from Christ, and by their mediation pouring out into the souls of their children. Okay, so we get it, the idea. And this is not something he made up. I mean, this is quite common often. So when we call St. Dominic our Father, it's not just poetry. It's real. St. Rita Marford talks about Our Lady and says she's our mother, but she's really our mother because we receive divine life through her, which is the life of grace. And in a similar way for us, it's not exactly the same. It's analogical. Just even the mediation of Our Lady is not the same as the mediation of our Lord, right? But it's similar. There's a similar way in which, just as Our Lady is our veritable mother in the order of grace, St. Dominic is our true father. All the graces that we receive pass through him. It is he that has merited them by his great sanctity and obtained them during his life and obtained by his merits, and then now obtains them by his prayer. See, he multiplied 100-fold the talents that were given to him, right? The parable of the talents. So, I mean, he's one of the greatest saints is for the church. So, I mean, it's immense, the treasure of grace that he obtained. And if you think of all these saints that came out of him, I mean, and great saints, it just shows how holy he was. It says in the preface of St. Dominic, I don't know if you've ever even seen that because it's not in your normal missals, but in the Dominican missals. Innumeras animas Christo lucri fecit. He gained for Christ innumerable souls. But lucri fecit is really like he bought them. He paid the price and bought them. So we are his children, and he is our brother. There's a beautiful passage of Father Vessieri. He writes, God has associated him to the ineffable mystery of his paternity, God the Father. Because you know the Trinity of the Dominican Trinity. You've heard that, right? St. Dominic is the Father, St. Thomas is the Son, St. Catherine is the Holy Ghost. Love. So God has associated him to the ineffable mystery of his paternity. The eternal love, which at the beginning of all things disposed everything with an infinite wisdom, willed us, chose us, and predestined us in St. Dominic. It made us his children. That is the eternal love. It united us to him by a link that is ineffable and vital. It willed that, like Abraham, he be the father of numerous generations. It gave him the grace of patriarch. So of his fullness we want received. Okay. So now we'll go on. Yeah, I'm going to start with St. Thomas. That was a good place to start. It's the Secundae, question 24. Now this beginning of the treatise on charity, because the Secundae is all about the virtues, the different virtues. Prima Secundae is kind of the general picture of moral life, the principles of it, everything. But the Secundae is all the different species of virtues. And so it starts with the theological virtues. And the first of them is faith. The second one is hope. And the third one is charity. So question 24 is the first question on charity. And Article 9 asks the question, because that's how the articles in the Summa always work. It's a question. Whether charity is rightly distinguished into 3 degrees: beginning, progress, and perfection, which correspond to the 3 ways that we're going to see: the purgative life, the progressive life, and the unitive life. Okay, so as always, it begins with objections. Wow, it's only 45 minutes. Yeah, we started at 1:15. Well, then we stop. I think you've got enough to go for a while. See, I have no idea how long for we're going to get. But that doesn't matter. And you will, one of the big, oh yeah, I didn't finish talking about that. Well, I'll do that later. But the difference. But you see, there's not this sort of rigid structure that you're going to be poured into, like they do with Ignatian retreats, with, bells ringing all the time, and do this, do that. Same issue with culture, right? And that's smart. And that's what you need at the beginning. You have somebody to push you, right? But as we're going to explain, that doesn't work. Afterwards, a certain point you have to stop pushing, right? And it's kind of hard at the beginning because nobody's pushing you. But it's kind of nice too, because you're not being pushed all the time. And you can, that's part of the whole thing. You have to, it has to become you. We're actually, with you have children, you help them in the beginning, and then they have to start to walk by themselves, act by themselves, be good by themselves. And there's different crises during that time. That's Jerry Hoover's going to talk about that. There's crises in spiritual growth too, just as there are in bodily growth. At a certain point, you just, they got to do it themselves. You can't push them forever. And so it's a spiritual life. It's the same thing. At a certain point, you have to start to do it yourself. So you might, some people find this retreat difficult because you're not being pushed around all the time. You're not being, you got to do it yourself. Do it for yourself. You got to, and we don't give you a lot of things to even meditate on in a way. Hopefully you brought some books or something for yourselves. It kind of assumes that you already have a certain spiritual life already and that you're here to make it grow. I mean, just the fact of being alone for, not 5 days, but 3 days away from the world, that's an essential thing, right? It's not so much what I'm going to say or just you're alone. You've got a place at least to be alone, away from the world. And I assume the idea is when you go home tonight too, you're, nothing to turn on the, whatever it is, computer, and right? You're supposed to be on retreat, right? We can't stay here. That's why I'm going to talk a lot, probably more than you might have expected. But you have time on your own later, an evening or in the morning, digest hopefully what I've said, and then for yourself, be alone with God. Right? That's the whole point of a retreat.